Hello and welcome to the Sociology 3 Module 15 video lecture on identifying omitted information. So why should we search for omitted information? Information that's missing, information that the author is either not explicit about or completely overlooks or deliberately withholds from the reader. Why should we look for this kind of information? Well, the major reason is because as critical thinkers, we always want to think about what factors are shaping the reasoning process that the author uses to support his or her conclusion. And omitted information often plays a pretty important role in that process. Think all the way back to the very beginning of the semester where we talked about the key attitudes and key characteristics of a critical thinker. One of those, if you'll recall, was autonomy, or independence or freedom from external control. And to really be autonomous critical thinkers, we have to persistently evaluate not only what is being said explicitly, but what information is being hidden by the author, either accidentally, unintentionally, or, as the case often is, on purpose. And it's really uncritical thinkers that only evaluate what is explicit or obvious about an author's argument. And thus, as critical thinkers, we're going to evaluate what's not only there, but what's missing. And that's why we have to search for omitted information. Now, that said, omitted information is just something that we have to accept as an inevitability. It's going to happen. There's really no way of preventing omitted information in anything that you read, hear, or see. And there are several reasons for this, and Brown and Keeley talk about each one of them. First of all, authors are limited by time and space when they're communicating their arguments and when they're articulating their reasoning. Even books can only be so long, and shorter types of media, newspapers, television shows where people only have a limited number of minutes maybe to communicate their reasoning, like presidential debates, if you ever watch those. They only have so much time to talk about things, and so it's inevitable that certain pieces of information are going to be omitted. Another reason is that we as readers often have limited attention spans. We can only take in so much information at any one time. Another reason is that an author's knowledge, no matter who they are, they can be the smartest person in the room, they can be the most knowledgeable expert on a particular topic, it's always going to be incomplete. No one can know everything there is to be known about, even a very specific topic. A fourth reason is that some authors just deliberately attempt to deceive their readers, particularly because they have a vested interest in convincing you of their position. Think of someone who's trying to sell you something, maybe someone who's trying to sell you a used car, who may not tell you all of the information, say, about the wreck history of the car. If this person really wants to unload that car on you, then they might not give you all of the information about the condition of the car that you're interested in buying. And finally, authors will often have different values, beliefs, or attitudes than we do as the readers. And because their goal is to persuade us to accept their stance on the issue, what they're going to often do is highlight certain things that align with their values, beliefs, and attitudes, and downplay or completely omit information that doesn't align with how they think about a particular issue. So for all of these reasons, it's inevitable that there's always going to be omitted information in any kind of argument, no matter who the author is. So how do we go about identifying omitted information? There are a lot of good critical thinking questions that we can ask when we read something or hear something or see something that will help us identify what information is missing and what information we really need to help us critically evaluate the author's argument. So first of all, anytime an author presents quantifiable information, always ask, but wait a second, what are the specific numbers you're talking about? So a couple of examples here. So say someone says to you, if you graduate from college, you will likely make more money than if you just had, and my apologies, that should read high school diploma. If you graduate from college, you will likely make more money than if you just had a college diploma. You want to ask this person, well, how much more money? How likely? There are some people who have just a high school diploma who make more than a lot of college degree holders. So what are the actual statistics and findings on that? And we know a lot about overall trends. The latest source that I read was that college graduates will make, on average, about $600,000 more in lifetime earnings than those who are only high school graduates. So that's an important piece of information for you to know to evaluate their argument, because you want to think, well, what's the size or the scope of the difference here? And $600,000 over one's lifetime is a pretty significant chunk of change. Definitely not pennies there, is it? It's a pretty significant difference. So remember that the next time you're working hard on a paper or studying for an exam. Another example, wearing a seatbelt reduces your risk of being killed in a fatal car accident. Okay, but how much? How much of a reduction there? So the information here by the author is just presenting these trends to you as general statements. What they're leaving out are the specific numbers. And you as a critical thinker would want to ask about specific numbers, right? What's the exact increase in risk? And that too is a pretty significant difference. But you probably want to ask me, right, as I said, well, Dr. Reynolds, how much is pretty significant? Using your critical thinking questions. I love it. Another thing we want to do to help us identify omitted information is consider any potential negative effects of the course of action that the author is proposing. So if the author is advocating for a particular position, ask yourself, are they omitting anything about maybe negative effects or certain groups of people who may not equally benefit from the proposed action? And this is very, very common when we listen to politicians who will advocate for the positive benefits of a policy or program that are beneficial, but usually only for certain groups of people. And what they leave out, what they don't tell you, is who it might negatively benefit. So a few sub-questions that you can ask yourself here are, who might not stand to benefit at all from this proposed action? How does the proposed action influence the distribution of power? Are particular groups' interest being served by this particular position, especially if the author is part of that group? What are the action's effects on our health and well-being? Are there any ways the action influences our relationships with other people in our lives, with strangers, with our community members? Are there any potential impacts on the natural environment? Is there a way that these programs or policies might negatively impact our environment and not lead to sustainable practices that we can keep up over the long term? Finally, are there long-term negative effects that might not be obvious in the short term? Maybe even effects that we don't know about, unintended consequences, unanticipated ones that might be really hard to detect given the limited information that we have right now. So let me talk about this as in terms of an example. Say that one of our administrators, say President Castro, he's not doing this, this is just hypothetical, proposed a new student fee at Fresno State specifically to fund new athletic facilities. And in doing so, people who were advocating for this position said, hey, this is going to be a really great way to strengthen the athletic programs at our university. This is going to attract revenue to the university because more people are going to come to our football games, our basketball games. This is going to attract, really high quality students who want to play sports in addition to their academic experience here at Fresno State, right? These are all reasons that someone's trying to convince you that you all should pay this new fee to fund athletic facilities. But say that was the argument that they made. What information is missing there? And if you said, well, what about the people who are paying the fees but not necessarily going to benefit from new athletic facilities, either because they don't play sports, they have no interest in sports, they don't ever care to attend any kind of football, basketball, any other sport game? Is it serving a particular group's interest? Athletes, but maybe not others, right? Maybe it's not serving the academic interest of the university, and adding another fee on top of what you all have to already pay can be a real financial hardship for a lot of people. Are there any long-term negative effects, such as, okay, say that we approve this fee in the short term for this athletic facility, what about building maintenance? What about upkeep of the facilities? Are we going to have money in the budget in the future to maintain this brand new building? And if not, does that mean that we have to increase the fee again after the building is built? So it's just one way of thinking through some questions and some ways you might think about something like this that really gets at a lot of that missing information that is incredibly important to understanding the author's argument, but that's not always explicitly stated. There are several other additional clues or questions that you can ask for detecting missing or omitted information. You could ask yourself, what are any potential counter-arguments? So if someone was going to adopt a stance on the opposite side of the issue, say that someone said we definitely don't need any more student fees, especially to pay for athletic facilities, someone who takes that stance, what's a potential counter-argument they might make to challenge the claim that we need this fee? Does the author neglect to define key terms or ideas? Are they being vague about their major concepts? Does the author seem to make any value assumptions in the reasoning? We've talked about this in previous modules. We all come at every issue, every conclusion that we make with particular value and descriptive assumptions. But is the author making those explicit, or is he or she keeping them hidden, and why might they be keeping them hidden? Does the author provide sources for the evidence that he or she is citing for why you should accept their conclusion? And did the author describe how the data was collected? So if someone says we should have this new student fee at Fresno State because charging every Fresno State student a fee can raise $10 million in more revenue, well, how did they arrive at that number? How was that data collected? Who collected that data? What's the source of that evidence? So if you go through these particular questions, it's a pretty sure bet that you're going to detect a lot of the missing information that you need to be attuned to for you to fully evaluate the author's argument using your critical thinking abilities. Now let's talk about another example pertaining to this week's other reading. Perrin, the reading entitled Why You Voted. I wanted to give you all a reading on political participation. Politics is a very important social institution, and hopefully you found this reading very interesting, if not a little sobering, in the sense that a lot of Americans don't vote. Most of us do vote in presidential elections, but in off-year elections, so years when we're not electing or re-electing a president, and especially in local and state elections, the vast majority of people in this country don't vote. And so Perrin is talking about this very important issue of political participation. And he concludes on the second page of the reading, page 23, he says, voting is among the most cherished ways of expressing political individuality, and in many cases, it's the only way citizens actually participate in their political communities. So this is his conclusion about this issue of political participation. And the critical question we want to ask in relation to this reading is, what information does Perrin omit that would be useful in evaluating his argument? Now keep in mind, we're not asking why he's making a bad argument. We're not saying that his information isn't good, but because omitted information is inevitable in every source that we're going to read, Perrin, no matter how great of a sociologist he is, no matter how much he knows about political participation in the United States or voting, he's going to leave out some important information. So can you think of any information in this reading that would have been very helpful for you to know to fully evaluate his reasoning to support this particular conclusion? A few things I came up with. So at the very beginning of the article, I just pulled out that first sentence there. He says, on November 4th, 2008, probably 140 million Americans cast votes in the election for President of the United States. Nearly as many citizens, although eligible, chose not to vote, whether out of inertia, disgust, or apathy. Well, some critical questions that we could ask here to help us identify omitted information. Well, where's the numbers here? How would that break down? Exactly how many people didn't vote for each of these reasons? What exactly does he mean by inertia, disgust, or apathy? Inertia typically means that people kind of if you're used to doing one thing, you kind of have a tendency to keep doing it, right? Habits. disgust, people just disgusted with the political process, or apathy, maybe they don't care, but we don't know if it's exactly how he's defining those terms, and we don't know how many people chose not to vote for each of those reasons. So we could ask those questions. How did the author arrive at this particular statistic? What's the source of his information? And did he provide sources for these particular claims? And actually, in that first sentence, he didn't actually provide specific sources. So that would be a really